And it works. Well, hello, Ally.
Hello, Jen. Welcome to another Unscripted with Fabulous Us.
We are fabulous. And
Fabulous.
we are indeed fully unscripted today because we just spent the last bit of time chatting about everything that is irrelevant to our topics. So we are fully unscripted, talking about the art and science of starting and finishing your book. I think we're both qualified to go rogue and unscripted here, so I think we'll be fine.
We sure are. In fact, we're just bringing the art part of all of this, right? Because the art part is a little less scripted. It's a little less formal. But before we dive into that, I think we want to acknowledge that people, it is midway through the year. Like quite literally today, July 18th of 2024, we are halfway through the 12-month calendar year, which means if you've done nothing on your book, you have 6 months left to go. I'm going to spin that on the glass is half full rather than you've wasted the first 6 months. No, you've got 6 months left to make good on the promise that you might have made to yourself going into this year that you were going to work on your book. And that's really where today's topic comes in, right? Because we want you to start at least, at minimum, we want you to start your book. Or if you're somebody who started, but you're now kind of puttering out, we want you to be able to cross that finish line by December. So Unscripted has brought lots of really great conversations to the table this year. So let's just recap some of those for our people to go back and catch some replays before we dive into today's topic.
Love it.
Jen, what has been one of your favorite conversations so far for Unscripted in 2024? Because this is like our first year. This is our 6th show.
I know.
We completely made this up at the end of 2023.
Sure did.
It's been awesome and wonderful. And I think those people who have been catching them live and the replays would agree. But like, what have you enjoyed the most in terms of like our topics?
You know, I don't know if it's like one show, because like we definitely covered like integrity and transparency and alignment and intention. Like we're always covering universal things that apply to pretty much anything. And I feel like that is what I have enjoyed. Like we've had a couple of guests talking about copyright things. We've talked about, trying to think how to frame our conversation with Jen O'Ryan.
Inclusive representation in content.
Yeah, like the right kind of language and verbiage and things like that. But what I think I have enjoyed the most is just and again, we are unscripted. I think it's the unscripted nature of it, even though we do typically have, some plan in place. But the fact that everything ties together, like every topic we have talked about somehow ties to another topic. There's nothing in the world of publishing or writing or marketing a book that does not have some interconnectedness to it. And I think sometimes we think about, and actually we were just having a little bit of this conversation on your open book broadcast, where we were talking about like the different finishing lines, right? Like there's the starting line of one race, which is the writing, and then there's the start and finish, and then publishing, start and finish. And then marketing, you just kind of start and you don't have an end. But I love that even that though there are definitive starts and finishes in certain places, it's still all interconnected. And I love that our show just kind of has that woven in. So really, I don't think it matters where you are in the process. I think any episode we have done is relevant and can potentially be helpful for someone.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the feedback that we've gotten through the comments as people have shown up live this year has been that like they've gotten something out of it. And I know from the people that I recognize who are in the comments, I know that they're at different spots in their path to publication, and yet they're still getting some goods, by joining us and tuning in. And I kind of feel like anything, right? Your job is never really done. So, whether you're an entrepreneur running a business or you're an author for the first time or second time or fourth time, right? Like there's always something new to learn. There's always growth to be had. There's always the next level, right, to reach. So, wherever you are on the grand scheme of things, like there's something here in this conversation. If you are an author or aspiring to be an author, right, regardless of where you're at, like just starting or like you're on your 10th book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's the beautiful thing about just kind of constantly learning and constantly wanting to learn. And especially when it comes to kind of like the promotional side of things, right, where we're now promoting our book. There's always something to learn. There's always something to test, always something new, which is kind of beautiful by comparison with like writing. I feel like there's so many tried and true methodologies and formulas that just work for people. And there's like a nice dependability, I think, in a lot of ways on the writing side, whereas marketing is just like a crazy can of worms for some people, especially depending on your comfort level with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So today, we're doing the art and science of starting and finishing your book. So naturally, this is a little bit more geared towards people who are in the thick of it with a current manuscript. I'm not going to say first-time authors because, quite honestly, no two books are the same. No two books have the same energy. No two books have the same pathway. I mean, like, Jen, you probably know this yourself, but like personally, the way I went about Dear Universe, I Get It Now, was an entirely different way I went about Do Not Write a Book Until You Read This One. Partially due to the fact that one was a solo act and the other one was a co-authorship. But even still, like the way that I wrote my parts on that second book were totally different than the way that I wrote, the first one. So I feel like today's conversation is relevant, even if you're on your next book or third book or whatever, because you might be finding different challenges with this book than you did the last one. Maybe because your genre is different, maybe because your life is different, maybe because the scope of the project is different. So I just want to call in all the people, whether you're here live or catching the replay, that there's something in this today for you. Jen, did you find that writing each of your books had different energies and different ways of going about starting and finishing?
Yeah, because it's like they're different children, right? Like if you think about it from everyone, people talk about having a book baby, but I think, for me, in part of my last book, the whole first part, the part one, is just getting into the right mindset, but having the right goals, right? So I think that sometimes what we don't think through enough as authors or as aspiring authors is when we are writing to have some kind of goal that we are trying to accomplish, whether we're talking about an actual writing goal, like I want to have a manuscript with X amount of words or done by X date, but also why am I doing this? Who is it for? What's my intention? Because I think that is what influences how you approach the entire writing, publishing, and marketing process. And so with my memoir in particular, House on Fire, I was like, I'm just going to let the book tell me what it wants me to do. I'm going to really just relinquish, give it over to the universe and allow the universe to tell me where it wants to go. And I found that it wanted to go places that I wouldn't have thought of. And this book, I have a really intentional strategy behind it. And so, and that also is partly due, and the same with you, right? You have your memoir, you have your nonfiction book.
Yeah.
They have to be treated differently in a lot of ways anyway. But even if you have two nonfiction books, the energy and the vibe and how you approach things, I think really does come back to what your goal is for you, what your goal is for your reader, and what the goal is for the book. Those three things sometimes are all the same and sometimes they're not.
Yeah, I love that. So first off, let's give a shout out. So Jen referred to part one of her book deals with these things. So this is the book she's referring to, Publish Your Purpose. Okay. And similarly, because our books are they're fraternal twins.
Sure.
Do Not Write a Book Until You Read This One, which is my latest and greatest with the fabulous Bridget McGowan Hawkins at Press 49. Our first part also goes into very similar things. I would say, in summary, ours begins before we get to the whys and the whats and the whos. Ours begins with the principle that you are the CEO of your book, and your book is just like a business, and it's up to you to understand your vision, right? Mission and values, which of course all flow right into the idea of goals, and then the who, the what, the why. What are you going to do with it in the long run? And these are all pieces, folks, of the science of starting and finishing your book, right? This name that we've given today's episode is very intentional, even if we are unscripted in how we are going about it. The titles and the themes of our conversations are deliberated upon and chosen very carefully. And so this is the science part of starting and finishing. And the reason I want to just put out here, right, in terms of the finishing piece. So basically what we're suggesting is you start with the end in mind, which has to do with finishing, right? We're putting the long-term mindset or game, right, up front and center. So understanding what you want to do with it on the other side before you actually start writing. But here's the other piece that makes this not just a starter, but a finisher, is that as you are developing your manuscript, you should be checking back in with the things that you started with, right? You should be checking back in with your goals, your mission, your vision. You should be checking back in with your promise to yourself, your promise to your reader. Those things should be guiding the rails, okay, as you go and helping you inch your way towards like publication and promotion. So, you know, these strategy things that we're talking about, or mindset things, are really for the entire length of the journey.
Mm-hmm. And I think what not enough people do is continue to go back and reevaluate the initial things that you came up with at the start of the process. So we start with the end in mind, which we are both aligned on that is the only way to go. And then you have to go back and just make sure, like, oh, hey, I'm halfway through the writing of this. I'm realizing this isn't exactly what I was going for. What have I created and how does it align with what my original intention is? Does it align? Great, let's keep moving. Or actually, it doesn't align anymore. I have to go back and revisit some of those original goals and figure out how to go from there. So I think that that's something that it's like the same thing in business, or you're trying to accomplish anything, right? You need to have an end date, an end result that you're kind of looking for, and then know how you're going to get there, which is the more tricky part. And that's why you, I, and many other amazing people in this industry do what we do, because like you might have an idea, but how you put a framework around it and the science part of it, that's where I think, you know, professionals are kind of here for the win, is to like really help put that science behind what you're up to.
Yeah, I love that. Jen, I attempted to put the link to your book in the comments, but it's telling me YouTube rejected it. So if you want to try dropping yours in there, since mine worked, but then when I did yours, it didn't. So folks, we're dropping the links to each of our books into the comments because, quite frankly, all of the stuff that we are talking about when it comes to today's topic, the art and science, are in either of our books. You can't go wrong with either one of these references. And in fact, Jen, you're running a special right now because of Prime Days on Amazon. Is that right? So is Publish Your Purpose still 99 cents?
It sure is. Yes, it's been in the #1 spot for almost 24 hours. Actually, over 24 hours at this point. Very excited about that because I'm part of Robbie Samuel's Prime Day special. And yes, I will not be changing the price back until probably sometime tomorrow. So there's plenty of time to get it for 99 cents, which I think
is this is the #1 right now. I want you to picture this book with a crown on top, because it is royalty. Get it today, tomorrow, sometime soon. Okay, so those are some of the sciencey things. And quite frankly, the other pieces of like the science of starting and finishing your book, I think have to do with strategy, not necessarily around the whys, the whos, and the whats, but strategy around how you're actually going to tackle the writing of the book. Okay. To me, science here is coming in with like an actual realistic and logistical plan for getting your butt in the chair and writing, holding yourself accountable, and celebrating the milestones along the way. Like, to me, this is not necessarily always about following the muse. And I do this whole thing where basically I see the muse as like Dobby the house elf from Harry Potter. And Dobby shows up whenever he feels like it, sometimes when he's called, but usually not. Usually he just shows up on his own agenda. He's kind of a pesky little thing. You can't really control him. You can't pin him down. He often is trying to protect you from things that you don't want to be protected from. Okay, anybody who knows Harry Potter and is a Dobby fan understands this analogy. Okay, this is the problem. If Dobby is inconsistent, okay, if your muse is named Dobby and it's inconsistent, you're never going to get this book written, which is why, to me, you need some science, okay? You need a plan, you need goals, you need reality checks when it comes to actually setting some time blocks and approaching the way that you try to get this done. And again, no two ways of doing this are the same. Like we don't have a one size fits all approach. The way that I write and get my manuscripts done for myself and my clients are different. Per client is different. What I do versus what Jen does is different. You know, my 2 books back to back, like they were different in how I approached it. So you might be reinventing the way that you go about this and see success every single time you work on a new project, but you should be thinking about, how am I going to do this in a manageable way for my lifestyle and for the way that I work? So some people talk about the 5 a.m. Writers Club. That would kill me. Okay. My family currently is calling me Grumposaurus because of the way that I operate in the morning. And that's at like 7 a.m. Can you imagine me at 5? I would not be functioning. No clear thought would ever be on a page for me at 5 a.m. I wouldn't even be able to get my butt out of bed at 5 a.m. So that works for some, doesn't work for all. The other thing I hear a lot is like, well, weren't the famous writers writing X number of thousands of words in the morning before they went to work. And I'm always like, what year was that? And who are these people?
Yeah.
A lot of these writers that we're referring to are privileged white men who probably didn't need to get up and be anywhere by a certain time, right? Or they were making their living off of writing, because it was a very different publishing landscape. And it was a very different way that writing was done and paid for and all of these things, right? So to compare yourself to one of the greats of like centuries ago, right?
Yeah.
Like, does not work in today's climate or landscape for today's people who are very busy, are wearing multiple hats, have multiple responsibilities, at home, at work, whatever it is. So I always say, when you're thinking about generating that plan for yourself, think about things like, when are you the most productive? When do you feel the most charged and dialed in? What times in your schedule during the week have enough expansiveness for you to actually put some hard energy, right? Intentional energy into your book. Are you somebody who can go in short sprints, or do you need longer time blocks? Like, you need to kind of self-audit and figure out what's going to realistically work, rather than trying to shove yourself into a small hole that somebody else has created that's worked for them. Jen, over to you.
I feel like the very newscastery of you. I like it.
I'm getting off my soapbox.
And we should have like an actual box where our height is elevated, and then we'll step down, and also have a crown. I agree with everything you just said. And what I want to just use like an example, especially for people who maybe you love writing, but then like there's some kind of roadblock that's getting in your way for writing a book. Or someone who might have written a book already and they're like, wow, the thing that worked for me in this last one is just absolutely not working for me today. In not my memoir, it was not this book, 3 books ago. I launched it in 2017. And that book tied directly to a consulting business that I had. So to me, it was like a business activity where I'm like, all right, working on my book a little bit today. And so I used to do the daycare drop off at like, I'd be home by 8 a.m. And so from 8 to 9, Monday through Thursday, it started off as Monday through Friday. I would sit and just write for an hour, crank it out, do my thing, and then move on. What I noticed over time was that on Fridays, for whatever reason, I was getting increasingly frustrated when I found that I had a call at 9 a.m. And then I was like, oh, I wonder, because I was still in flow. So for whatever reason, over time, I was able to see, wow, I really am in flow on Fridays. No other days, but Fridays in particular, I just need more time. So I gradually started to extend it. I'm like, all right, I'll just write until 10. And then I was annoyed at 10 because I'm like, oh, now I gotta take this call. And so then I'm like, I'm gonna extend it to 11, until finally I was like, I'm just gonna use Fridays as my day to write when I'm actively working on a book. Clearly, if I'm not actively working on a book, I'm not dedicating all that time. And that works really well for me. It was 8 to 9, Monday to Thursday. And then it was usually like 8 to 11 or 12 on Fridays. I tried to apply that same concept to this last book, my Publisher Purpose book. There's not a chance in hell that would have worked. And I tried. And what I found with this book is that the only time I felt inspired to write it was when I was traveling. So whether I was flying or on some kind of public transportation. Yeah. And that's what worked for me. Did it take me longer? Yeah, because I wasn't, and I also, yes, it took me a lot longer because I wasn't flying as much because of COVID related situations. And so it took longer, but I felt like I was on fire when I was actually flying in particular. I got so much done. And so had I tried to do one for the first book or that one for either way wouldn't work. So my whole long-winded point is not to lock yourself in to some way that you think you should have to do it, or you feel like someone else is doing it and you're like, oh, well, I have to do it the way Ally's doing it. That's not how our brains are wired.
Yeah. I love those examples. And it makes me think of how different Dear Universe was over Do Not Write a Book. Dear Universe happened in a time in my life when I had a toddler and I was only a year into my business, right? So you can imagine how busy I was. And I was also going through separation and divorce, or I was on just barely on the other side of those things. So life was real chaotic, and I was still figuring out like, what does the new normal look like, and how do I balance all of these things? And so Dear Universe got done by something I call the writing sprint. It was where I had 15 minutes or 30 minutes to just do uncensored writing, meaning I wasn't going back and I wasn't editing. I was literally just dumping stream of consciousness stuff onto the page to get through that first draft. And it worked in those short spurts. So when it came to writing Do Not Write a Book, even though I had a co-author, I thought, okay, cool. Like I can just write it in short spurts. Well, life had changed a lot in 4 years. Short spurts was no longer working. The way that I saw this book, similar to the one that you were talking about in 2017, this was like thought leadership. It was supposed to be something really directly connected to my business in a different way than what my memoir had been. So I was like, I can't just do it in 20-minute spurts. Like I got to be intentional. I also felt like a different sense of pressure because I had a co-author and I wanted to like bring my A game in a totally different way because there was somebody else involved in the output of this project. We had a timeline in a different way than what I had with Dear Universe. Dear Universe was like a self-imposed deadline, whereas we had something that kept shifting, but like, we were always working towards a target. And I found that it was like, it's not these spurts, they're not working. Like I need designated time. I had to block it as a part of business hours. It was just a very different flow and energy. And now as I'm working with clients, like I've stopped kind of like suggesting the writing sprint method in all instances because I've learned that it doesn't work for everyone. It didn't even work for me on my second book. And what I have found with at least 2 clients more recently is they need weekend getaways. Yep. They cannot figure out how to focus in their homes and just like go for it. There's too many distractions. Or they're so exhausted by their day job that they have nothing left capacity wise for their manuscripts. And so with them, we planned these small little writing retreats that were affordable and nearby for them to kind of get out of Dodge and focus on their manuscripts. A couple other clients, they do better writing their draft by hand than they do to type it immediately into the computer. And so one of them has done something really clever where they invested in is it a Rocket Book or
those things.
And she does everything by hand and then kind of translates it over into digital, so it saves her a little bit of time. Which is really cool, right? But like I remember the day that she sent me a voice message through Voxer to say she wanted permission to do it this way, right? Because she was like, she thought she was doing it wrong because we have these, I don't know where they come from, but we have these ideas of like, what's the right way to write a book. And I'm constantly like, the right way is the way that makes you feel successful, makes you feel confident and in control of the process and gets this shit done.
Correct.
That's the right way.
Yeah. And I can't even imagine handwriting a book. The thought of that sounds awful. And I have a friend who did that. And it was like an 80,000 word like fiction novel that he was writing. And I'm like, what? And he's like, now I'm going through and I'm like typing it in. I'm like, what? Like my mind was exploding as he was telling me this, but it worked for him. And that is all that matters.
That worked for him. Yeah. I'm an outline by hand, like conceptualized by hand, but I'm like a direct to computer, like drafter. So like, I'm fascinated by like the write it all down first, because I get a headache thinking about having to then translate that over, digitally afterwards.
Oh my God, trying to read my own writing.
When you're in that flow state, like,
no way. I found journals of mine, or a journal, if you will, from when I was 15, and it's only like 3 months. And I found it probably 2 months ago, and it has taken me, and I still am not through it because I can't read my own writing. And so I'm like painfully, like my eyes hurt, and I'm like, I can only do a few pages at a time. And I really want to see like some of the outcomes from some of the things that I'm writing about, which, it's stupid teenage things, but I'm just genuinely curious. And so, the idea of trying to like actually read that and type it into a computer seems impossible to me. But again, it might work for you. And maybe you have beautiful handwriting. And if so, you are a gift among gifts.
Yep. Now, here's another piece of the science of starting and finishing. And to me, that's accountability, right? Like, how are you intentionally activating accountability throughout the process, right? Because it's not something that if you just do it on a whim, right, is going to be effective. And I think the thing that I find with like the writers or the clients who, start with me maybe in a consultation, or they start with me on one level of coaching and then they don't continue, is that those projects never get done.
Yeah.
Because they don't have accountability in place. And not that that's the only thing that I provide in my services, but it's a big piece of it.
Sure
when
is.
you know that you've got to show up to the next call with a chunk of your manuscript done, or the next piece of your plan done, or whatever it is that we're working on, you know, you're more inclined to do it because somebody else is waiting for it. And of course, you're also more inclined to do it because you're paying, right, somebody for the service. But there's plenty of other ways to set up accountability. And to me, that's like, if nothing else, that's the thing that needs to be in place. And I know this even now, like I've got umpteen other projects, like personal projects that I want to work on. And I know that I'm not getting them done because I don't have accountability set up yet.
100%. Yep. Same
So
exactly.
this is the thing that's really needed. Now with do not write a book until you read this one. Flash. You know, having the co-author was the accountability, right?
Yeah.
We knew we had chapters we needed to send to each other in order to review and edit and revise and all that jazz. With Dear Universe, I Get It Now, I feel like the accountability I had was I actually, after I got done a chapter or a letter, every time I got done a chapter or letter, I actually read it out loud to a friend in Voxer to get immediate feedback on that particular piece, right? And since she was kind of like loving hearing the raw, you know, the raw form, I was like motivated and inspired to get the next one done, right? So I could read it out loud. It was also super helpful from like a revising standpoint, because when you hear your words out loud, you know where to fix them. But lately I'm like, I don't know what the accountability measure is. Like, I don't know. I've lost my way because I'm so up to here with everybody else's projects that I'm like, I don't even know how to be a writer anymore. But it's so important to have at least one person who's on the other side, waiting for something, asking for something, nudging you to say, hey, did you or not, right? And I feel like it's important to like figure out what are those rules or boundaries around the project, who in your life can help you hold them, right? And then execute. So like, does it look like telling a partner, like, okay, here's my goal. I want to get a draft in the manuscript done in the next 6 weeks, which means if you're good with it, you're going to do all the dishes and laundry for the next 6 weeks. And the time that I would usually be puttering around the house doing all that crap, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to shut the door and I'm going to write, and you're not to interrupt me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Not everybody has that situation or setup or that comfortability with their partner or spouse. Not everybody has one of those, right? So like, what do you do instead? But I think that it has to be intentional. It has to work for you. And the other person has to be like in there with you. Otherwise, like the accountability just isn't gonna work.
No, I couldn't agree more. And one of my chapters, I think it's chapter 4. I feel like I should know this specifically, but I think it's chapter 4, is about accountability and support systems, right? So when we look at accountability and we look at support systems, what do we actually need that to look like? And so what I always tell people is that they need a strategist. So someone who's going to help with the strategy of things, regardless of what that looks like or who that person is, a therapist, and a cheerleader, right? That is, to me, are the 3 mainstays from an accountability standpoint, because you can have someone who's holding you accountable and they could be beyond less interested in what you're doing. And that's not really going to be motivating. So it's almost like there needs to be like motivation and accountability, kind of like like accountability has to create motivation. And I think if you have someone who's like, oh, there's Ally with another book, I'm so over this. That's not going to be inspiring for you to be like, oh, I can't wait to send it to this person. And what I love is that there's always something to learn. And your idea of reading that to someone in Voxer or a voice memo or whatever is freaking brilliant. And it never even crossed my mind for someone to do that. So like that is my takeaway from today's conversation, that I'm now going to use that as an example for other people to try.
Well, my takeaway is what you just said, like the 3 people that kind of like are the trifecta for accountability. Like, it's not just somebody who is holding you accountable, but also has to motivate you. And therefore they have to have an investment or stakes in it. But also the idea that there's also a strategist and a therapist, right? Because those are all distinct roles, right? They're not all doing the same thing, even if they're all impacting accountability, generally speaking, right? They each have a different angle as a part of that accountability. I like that a lot. And folks, therapy is especially important with memoir. I just got done doing, so at the beginning of every week over on my YouTube page, Facebook page, LinkedIn profile, usually on Monday, I do something called the Memoir Minute. They're short little videos all about writing memoir. These last few weeks, I've been talking about tools to have in your toolbox, tool belt, tool shed, whatever tool thing you want to use. And I'm recently talked about having a therapist, and I am so sincere when I say that, when it comes to memoir, because memoir is going to dig up a lot of crap that you thought that you had handled. But when you start to write about that crap, it brings up all new levels of crap. Okay.
True.
So you need to have a therapist on speed dial, and somebody that you know, like, trust, because it's just so important to your mental health as you're working on that particular type of genre. I mean, it's helpful in any genre because there's a level of vulnerability that's involved in sharing your message, your words, your thought leadership, whatever it is. But memoir is not about the soft, cushy stuff in life. So if any of the genres, that one in particular, like, have some professional support.
Couldn't agree more. And, you know, sometimes people are like, well, I can't afford to work with a professional. Then grab your best friend, grab somebody who's close to you, but just make sure it's somebody who is really going to be there for you, who knows how to hold the space when you are having a meltdown. Because it's not like if you're going to have a meltdown, if you're writing a memoir, it is when and how many is what you're really looking for. Because memoirs they're brutal, they're amazing, and they're so cathartic because it really does force you to move through all of the things. But if you can find yourself someone that is a paid professional who this is what they are trained to do, it is going to be, I think, a night and day difference for your sanity on the other side of it. And they can also kind of be the one that's talking you off the ledge to be like, yes, you're right. You know, you're writing about this thing, but it's not published yet, right? Like I end up telling people that all the time, like what you're writing now and what actually is out on the page that readers are reading, a lot of times that gets changed a lot through the, you know, your drafting process and then through the editing process. So just because you're putting it on paper doesn't mean people are immediately seeing what you have to say, and you have plenty of time to finesse it so it doesn't come across as in a way that you don't want it to.
Yeah, and we're similar in that. Like when people start to get worried about that piece, I tell them FYEO, for your eyes only. That's where we're at right now. Like, so this like additional worry and pressure that it's not perfect yet and that people are going to read it in the raw form is only adding more emotional weight that you don't need in those early stages of drafting, right? And by the time it's ready for publication, you will have done so much due diligence in getting it to a place that you feel comfortable with, that you won't have the same level of fear. It's not that there won't still be fear, but you won't be as uncertain about how people are going to receive it. And that's usually the thing that people are worried the most, is how people will receive what they've written and then respond as a result. And I think the other thing that you said that's really, you know, really important. Yep, it was there. Poof.
All right.
This is what happens, I guess.
We're magicians. Poof. All right. While you're thinking of it, I'm going to throw another science. I'm going to throw a little science nugget in here while you're thinking. Okay. So the other piece from a scientific standpoint is if we think about computer programming, right? A lot of it's like if this, then that. So if this function happens, then that function has to happen. I always have our authors, especially those who are working with us like through our writing programs, come up with the things that they know are going to derail them right out of the gate. So if my family is up my you-know-what in my space doing whatever, then I am going to go do this thing. Or I am going to leave the house, or whatever the case may be. So you know that your family is going to interrupt you. You know if you have pets, they're going to interrupt you. You know if you have a job, somehow the carved out time that you have allocated, someone is going to need something from you during that exact moment. So instead of having a panic, meltdown, breakdown, when that thing happens, you can go to your list of the if this, then that's and be like, all right, you know, Jen said that this was going to happen. I noted if this does happen and here I am, then I'm going to go do this thing instead. And sometimes the then instead is that you're just not going to write that day, and you're going to be okay with not writing that day. And you're not going to beat yourself up because you missed a day based on something that was outside of your control. Or it's that you are like, I can't do this anymore. I really do need to leave the house and write, or I need to go outside or go sit in my car in the driveway if that's what it takes, right? So just having those pre-planned things in advance, it stops us from having that full-blown panic because we have a timeline, we have a goal, we're trying to make certain progress on things, and then something derails us. It's very easy to get caught in our emotions and have those weigh us down rather than be like, I planned for this. I am better than this. I made the plan, and now I'm going to follow the plan. I find that helps people tremendously.
Yeah, well, and it also removes guilt and shame around not following through on things, because those are the words
Mhm.
that keep coming up from my clients when they don't reach a particular deadline. There's
Mhm.
absolutely no grace for like life happening. Okay, so what you said just then reminds me of the thing that I lost a moment ago. It's come back. And what I was going to say, and it's very similar to what you're talking about with the if-then statements, which is when somebody comes to me to work on memoir, especially, and I know that that memoir has a lot of very traumatic material, I will actually say to them in the beginning of our process, okay, to your point, Jen, like you just said, like it's not if, it's when, right? Like when you are emotionally triggered, what supports do you already have in place? What tools can you already rely on? Like I do that mental health check. Are you still working with a therapist? No, call them back. You know, what were things that have worked in the past when you've been emotionally triggered? And we might talk about breathing exercises. We might talk about visualization. We might talk about walking. You know,
Yeah.
salt baths, whatever it is, right? But we identify some of those tools that they can go for, so that we've brought them to the top of mind. We've acknowledged that the triggers will happen. We know what they can reach for when they do. And we also know that one of the options is to take a break.
Yep.
Like sometimes it's just necessary.
Mhm.
Sometimes that's just necessary even when it's not emotionally triggering. It's just freaking fatigue, because this can be a marathon, writing a book. Okay, let's switch from science to art.
Yes.
Where does the art of writing and finishing a book come in? What would we consider the art pieces?
Well, to me, I think I'm going to take this in the most literal sense of art and think about like the design of the book and using that as inspiration. So I think a lot of times when we think about books, we think of like this very standard, following best practice, black and white paper, cream paper, standard margins, standard font size, standard headings, subheadings, fonts, etc. They're all standard for a reason, because they're effective, they work, it's easy for people to read, it's an expectation. Readers just kind of expect that there's going to be like a standard nonfiction, or even more so a standard memoir look. I think memoirs all have a very kind of like standard-ish look for the most part. If someone wants to add a little flair into what their book officially looks like on the other side, there are so many actual artistic ways to do that, where you can draw in elements from your cover design. You can draw in, like, we have a memoir that's going to come out in a couple of months, and he's also an artist. And so it's his memoir. He's writing about certain experiences. And then he has a piece of art that's generally from the same period of time that he's writing about. And so it adds like an extra dimension to the
Yeah.
words when you have a little bit of art to it. So that is the first thing that popped in my head, because instead of just being like, oh, well, I'm going to let the publisher figure out what the inside of the book's going to look like. It's like, no, if you want to feel inspired and like really get excited about what you want your book to do, think about what photos you might want to include. Or if you're writing, you know, some kind of leadership book or business book, think about what models or methodologies or charts or things like that you can kind of bring in, because I think that helps us continue to feel inspired as we're kind of moving through this process. Because I think that it's the accountability, the inspiration, and the motivation. I think those three things are like the somehow a through line in pretty much every aspect of this process.
Yeah. I always recommend that people do like a vision board, whether that's like, you know, paper and you've got scissors and tape and glue, or you're doing something like on Pinterest, but like look at other covers that you like and what you like about them. Think about color palette, think about font choice, think about illustration versus photography, abstract versus realism, you know, when it comes to the cover design, right? Like your input matters, especially when you're working with, you know, independent or hybrid publishers where you've got control as the author. They should be weighing in with their expertise as to what something might, you know, if it works or if it doesn't work, you know, whatever. But you need to come to the table with some inspiration for yourself of what you envision. And I think it's also important when you're looking at presses that you're wanting to work with, that you look at their covers. If you're not impressed with the way that they package, right, because that's essentially what a cover is packaging. If you're not impressed with the package look of their previous books, then maybe that's not the publisher for you, because you want something super eye-catching and deliberate. Now, for me, when I think art, I think of, you know, in the MFA program, right, that I got my Master's of Fine Arts in, you know, we would call it the art and craft of, right, learning, and in my instance, memoir, like I was focused there, right? So art and craft, like what does it even mean? Like basically that means the study of developing a really well written book in a particular genre, that there's an artistic expression of it, just like a painter has different ways of doing different types of art, impressionism, abstract, you know, whatever it is. And the craft is like the way that you actually like build it and make it sing. So for me, the art comes in here when it comes to starting and finishing your book. The art comes in the process, being comfortable with the iterative process that is writing, being in there to revise, thinking about word choice, thinking about metaphor, analogy, the rhythm of a line, you know, not starting every sentence in a paragraph with the same word, the way that a scene gets developed and really sucks the reader into the moment. You know, these are all the artistic pieces of writing, especially when it comes to memoir, because memoir reads like fiction. So a lot of the same fiction principles, you know, point of view, plot development, character development, scene, action, dialogue, right? All of those things that make a fiction novel a page turner are the same things that you have to draw into memoir. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that our thought leadership books and our nonfiction books that are in business or professional development or whatever don't have a particular art form to them, right? There's also still a way to craft that book to make it stand out, to make it seem different, to incorporate story elements so that it still hooks the reader's interest. Like, so to me, developing the manuscript is really where art is taking place. And sometimes it's basing it off of your intuition. Sometimes it's reading a line and just knowing something doesn't feel right. It's clunky, it's odd, it sounds weird. And so there's a lot, I think, of the developing of the writing that is way more expression, authenticity, energy, intuition than like the planning, the strategy, you know, that kind of thing.
I agree. And I think where the art then blends into the science is thinking about all of the artistic and creative liberties that you've taken to putting it on the page, but then making sure that chapter to chapter, there's some kind of consistency and coherence between how they flow from one to the other. And so a lot of times this turns into some kind of like formula, right? Where you have like an opening story, and now you're introducing the problem to, I mean, the solution to whatever the problem that the story highlighted. And then you add whatever your framework is and your step-by-steps, and then you have some kind of conclusion. And so having there be that consistency, I think when you have the art there, the artistic side of the words there, through the editing process, the refinement process, that's where the science can start to kind of like pick back up when you just make sure. Because I think a lot of times, I don't know about you as a reader, but I feel like we're also too close to it because we're professionals in this space. But readers will read a book, and for some reason, something just doesn't work for them. And they can't identify exactly what's not working. But a lot of times it is like a lack of consistency. It's a lack of cohesion, or maybe sometimes it's that one chapter's 2 pages and the next chapter's 40 pages. They don't know that that's not necessarily the best way to do it, but they just know that something doesn't sit well with them. And then they put the book down and they don't pick it back up again. And then now they're not being impacted by all the wisdom that you had. So there really is, which is why we said the art and science, because it is such a fine balance to get both. Striking that balance of both is so important.
Yeah. And I do think that there are frameworks, right? There are frameworks for nonfiction and there are frameworks for memoir, and multiple frameworks. You know, I rely in my coaching and developmental editing and ghostwriting, I rely on like the 3-act structure and understanding what's supposed to happen in each of the acts in a nonfiction book versus a memoir. Another thing that I always bring my memoir people through is the story arc. How does their story plot along the story arc, right? And to me, that is a science. Like there are specific points along the story arc that you need to hit in order for your story to have a natural kind of like start and end, rising tension, you know, those types of things. And then the art is where you make that story really come to life and emotionally hold the reader for a long period of time because of the way that you've told the story. And what the reader ends up consuming is more art than science, right? Because to your point, they don't know how things end up on the page. And this is so true because all of my clients are readers, avid readers, and yet they've always at one point along the way say, I had no idea how hard it was going to be to actually write my own book. So they know what they're looking to do. They know what the final should look like because they're an avid reader. They've consumed hundreds of beautifully written books. But then when they sit down to actually do it, they're like, I have no idea, right? Because they don't know the science. They know what the art looks like. So yeah, these things are so interconnected, and I'm just like totally here for this conversation.
I know. It's like,
love this conversation.
It's like the nerding out aspect of us both, because it really is, because it's the art and science which lights us up differently in both in different ways. And what's funny is that we have a 6-month writing program. It goes from like, you get this idea in your head to having the manuscript done in 6 months. And it's intense on purpose, because we want people to really be committed and dedicated to it. Because again, like, I don't want to be working with people who don't have the motivation to actually do something with their work, right? Like, if you want to write a legacy type of thing, there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm not going to be your person unless you have a bigger motivation in life. And what happens all the time in this program is that we'll have somebody who's like, I was just looking at a book on my bookshelf and I didn't realize the amount of decisions that have to be made in order to decide. And then they rattle off like 55 things that they have learned through our program. And they're like, I will never look at a book the same way again. And I think most authors say the same thing, because I think, you know, sometimes the average person might just take it for granted that they read this really amazing book, but did not realize the countless hours and people involved in getting it to that place. Because if we just published what our first thoughts were out of our head without any revision, editing, support from other people, can you imagine the tragedy of the literary world? It would be bad. It'd be bad.
It would be horrible. The equivalent to what your clients say on my end is, how does anyone do this on their own?
Yeah.
And do it well.
Absolutely.
Right? Because I'm constantly like picking on them. Like, not picking on them like in a mean way, but like, okay, well, what about this? And did you think about that? And they're like, oh my God, like, no, I didn't think about it, because I didn't know to think about that, right? I didn't know that was going to be important, like right now, you know? And it's very similar, right? Like, they learned so much by being with a professional throughout the process, that they're like, how does anyone get to something good and quality on the other side without somebody with them from the get-go? And there are plenty of people who figure it out, you know. I don't know that it's a large percentage, but it's not impossible. Of course, being who we are and what we do, we would obviously recommend that people work with a professional.
Yeah, clearly we're going to be biased. But yeah, I think that the percentage is small. And I think that's why there's just still like you and I both know that self-publishing in particular has come such a long way. Like, we both know that. But I still think that there is a perception by a lot of readers that if something is self-published, it's not going to be the best quality. And I think the difference between a good quality self-published book and one that is not a good quality is that the good quality one, the author still knew, I have to hire an editor, I have to hire designers, I need thought partners to help make this happen. It's the authors that say, I can edit it myself, or I can design my cover in Canva, or whatever the case may be. Those are the books, unfortunately, I think drag down the kind of experience that people have. And I just wish that, and obviously, like I said, we're both going to be biased that we think working with professionals, it doesn't have to be me, it doesn't have to be you, but just work with a professional, just someone who is in this space to be able to really help you get it across the finish line, because there's so much that goes into the writing of it. The publishing of it is a nightmare unto itself, right? Like, it's just a whole other can of worlds, different skill sets, different things that you need to make it happen. But having that Sherpa to kind of guide you through what needs to happen will make sure that the book doesn't just kind of like die in that draft form. Because I think that's what breaks my heart, is when you know that someone like spent so much time and then they just couldn't get out of their own way, and then it just sits there, or they publish it and it's terrible. And then and everyone's like, ew, what did you do? And you don't want that to happen either. So it's like, there's got, again, an art and a science. There's got to be a balance here.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love it. And I could just jump right on there to talk about a conversation I had with somebody earlier this week, but we don't have time for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap up with some rapid fire. Are you ready for some rapid fire,
I
Jen?
love how much energy you have given your level of tiredness. So yes, please hit me.
You bring it out in me. Okay. Rapid fire. First question, and we'll just kind of popcorn. First question: worst writing habits that either you have or you've heard somebody else have.
Oh my God. Okay. Why don't you start? Because now I feel like I'm stumped. This is rapid fire. I need to be faster.
This is rapid fire. So mine is going to be something that I used to do, but something that I also see tons of people do even now. You get so stuck in the first couple of chapters that you don't write the rest of the manuscript because you keep going back to fix and perfect the first couple of chapters. And that's only going to slow you down, because trying to get those two things perfect, right? Like when you've got another 75% of the book left to write, you're doing yourself a major disservice.
I cannot tell you how many manuscripts that we get where that is the feedback from the editor of like, oh my God, like the first half of this is like really good. And then the second half just really kind of falls off. So yes, I get that. I would say the bad habit, the worst habit would be relying on spell check and grammar check too much, right? Like you want to do one, but don't go in there and be constantly flipping because somehow Grammarly is telling you there needs to be a comma and then actually something else, words telling you don't need a comma. Like just freaking ignore it. Like worry about it later, do it in copy editing.
Yep. Best writing rewards. So this could be like celebratory things like along the way to pump yourself up when you reach a certain milestone, or the most rewarding thing about having a book.
Oh, I think best writing rewards is doing something that is for you specifically, like having some kind of like little mini celebration. I know for me, like I just like, this is going to sound like the craziest thing ever. And this is not a reward, but like my habit is that if I have hit a milestone for something or accomplished whatever the thing is, I tend to sing to my cats. And so I will literally grab one of them and just twirl that feline like a Disney princess. Like, I mean, like it is some level of crazy around this house. I'm not even kidding. I wish I were making this up. But like, I know we're both crazy. I know. But like, it's just one of those things that like, it is now like just ingrained in me. That it's like, oh my God, like I finished this chapter. Like where's Peaches? I got to go grab her. Like, it's just, it's wild. But it like triggers something in my brain, like some reward thing in my brain, even though it's not a reward. I could go pick her up and spin her like a princess any day, any minute I want. But I think just having something that like makes you feel good, whether it's, I'm going to eat that piece of candy that I've been craving. I'm going to take myself to that restaurant. I'm going to have that drink I want, or whatever the thing is. It's a reward that works for you specifically.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Definitely during Dear Universe, I had dance parties and like a playlist, you know, cause it felt like a huge undertaking to like believe in myself enough to like get through a letter at a time or you know, whatever it was. I'm going to answer the question though, from a perspective of like, what are the rewards of writing a book, right? Number one for memoir, I definitely think it's the healing, transformation, or empowerment and liberation that comes from telling your story and owning your story. It's a whole new level unlocked of like personal bravery, authenticity, owning your shit, standing up strongly, you know. And I also think one of the greatest rewards, and there are several, but one of the greatest rewards is anytime a reader relates to what you've said and writes back to let you know that it resonated with them. Whether it's messaging you personally or it's leaving a really great review on Amazon, there is just nothing that could beat reader feedback that is positive and that proves that the negative naysaying mindset that you had in the beginning that nobody would care was absolute bullshit. So yeah, I would say that's like in my top. Okay, Jen, favorite place to write?
It's going to sound crazy, but I really think flying is by far 100% my favorite place to write because I feel like I'm prolific when I'm in the sky and I can't be bothered. But second to that, and more practically, is in my car. Like, interestingly enough, in my car, I get a lot of writing done in my car. Obviously not while I'm driving, but yes. I end up in a lot of places near where water resides because my son loves fishing. And so he's fishing and I'm sitting in my car and it works out fine.
Cool. All right. I would say coffee shops. I just like, you're with people, but you're not with people. And there's like noise, but like it's white noise. So like you can like really, you know, zone in, plus the aromas of coffee, like that just like totally does it for me. Next best would probably be like you said, buy some sort of body of water, whether that's, you know, my parents' place on the lake here in Vermont, or, you know, going somewhere else, like where it's just getting away and like hearing the water and zoning out. Okay. Writing quirks. I mean, we already heard you about, singing to the cats, but
yeah, obviously
some of your other writing quirks.
You give an example first, because I'm trying to figure out what would be a quirk if it's not singing to cats.
Okay. Well, I would say that like the things that I usually have with me when I am writing are Reese's peanut butter cups or peanut butter M&Ms. Yep. They're there today. I had a lot of writing to do today. Even though they're not a healthy option, but man, chocolate and peanut butter together, like this is like my thing. Maple lattes are like the next thing. Like if I'm in that coffee shop, like, other writing quirks, that are not to do with like my atmosphere, like in the writing itself. Well, I learned in Dear Universe that I used that a lot, far more than I should have. And the line editor pointed out like how many thousands of instances of the word that I used. And I was like, okay, so that's a writing tick that I have that I didn't know. So I got really good at looking for that in a lot of my writing, but just recently a client's project came back and apparently I replaced that with the word just.
Which is worse.
So there were like 50,000 instances of just in this 85,000 word manuscript. And I was like, sweet, who knew? And God bless line editors for this exact reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's one of my quirks is like these filler words that are not really necessary, but they're in there. And I just can't seem to get away from them.
That is hilarious. I think on that front, so like one of the like atmospheric ones is that I like, this is the woo-woo side of me, but I always have like crystals, some kind of crystal around me. I have like a whole giant dish of them sitting next to me right now.
And yet again, we are so similar.
Why does this keep happening? Every episode we do, there's some random thing that comes up. Well, here's today's, folks.
This is my big one.
Yeah, I have crystals all over the place all the time. And so I like to have at least one of them with me. Like right now I have like my little black one. But then the writing quirks, like the writing itself is I am a little bit nuts with M dashes. I don't know what it is with the M dash, but girl, do I love an M dash with everything. And I love starting a sentence with and then an M dash. Do you want to know that my editors wanted to probably come choke me as a result of this? Because it's always like M and M dash and then whatever I'm about to say. Because I feel like it adds more emphasis. Is it grammatically correct? No, not at all. But that is absolutely my quirk.
I love it. I love it. All right, folks. Well, we would love to hear from you, even if you're catching the replay. Put your writing quirks or your favorite places, your best writing rewards, your worst writing habits into the comments. We would love to hear from you and know, how are you doing the whole writing thing? And of course, if you have any questions, please post them in the comments. We are happy to return to today's video and answer them there. So to wrap up today's episode, Jen, what do you want to shamelessly promote?
I'm grabbing the link for it right now. So we have supported so many of our authors in the marketing of their books for a very long time at this point, but we've never had a way to help people market their books that have not worked with us directly. And so we are launching a program called Promote Your Purpose. And it is a 6-month marketing program to help people figure out how to actually market their books, but not in a way that feels gross and sleazy. It's not talking about creating these big, sophisticated campaigns, although you can. It is more grounded, down-to-earth things that anyone can do regardless of what your budget is. And so that is what I would like to shamelessly share today.
Awesome. Now, when does that kick off, or is it evergreen?
It is, we're doing a beta test now. So the beta folks, it's up to 10 people. It starts, I believe, same as when your memoir thing starts. I think it's August 20th. It's definitely the 3rd week in August. And so, yeah, it's for 10 people only. We already have a number of people registered and it's 6 months. So the beta, I think, is going to be really exciting because it's myself and Nikki on my team. And we're going to be going well above and beyond because we want to make sure that we have all of the things that people could possibly need to actually get their books marketed. So we're both really excited about this.
Cool. What's the price point?
It is $4.97 a month. So we're keeping it low and reasonable, again, because it's a beta.
Oh my gosh. Love it. Okay. Well, I was going to shamelessly promote something that was listed in here, but I'm changing my mind. And the reason that I'm changing my mind is because there's only a couple seats left to this particular thing that I've got going on here in Vermont in October. And that's Craft Your Memoir Around the Campfire. So this is a little mini writing intensive, and there's only 7 seats total, and 3 are already taken. So this is kicking off Friday, October 11th. We're wrapping up midday Sunday, the 13th. And I'm doing this for $525. Now, the caveat to that is it does not necessarily include overnight accommodations. So if you're coming from a surrounding place, you would be coming to the Airbnb each day, but you would need to find your own place to stay overnight, because the spots that were available for staying right on site were already taken. But this is a great way to jumpstart that memoir with me, your guide, for a couple of days at a low cost investment. It's like 15 hours of instruction. Plus there's like writing workshop, there's writing instruction. We got it all.
Such a steal.
This couple of days. So This is such a steal. Yeah. So if you're in like New York, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, even like Montreal, Canada, and it's an easy drive over, and you can grab an overnight somewhere, like, we would love to have you. Again, there's only 4 spots left.
And people who are not in this general New England tri-state area, if you will, Vermont in October, New England in October in general is gorgeous, but Vermont in October is absolutely incredible. So the fact that you get you for that low of a price, for that long of a period of time, and you're in like the really incredibly gorgeous atmosphere, seems like an absolute no-brainer. So I'm excited.
Other great thing about this is that this is actually the long weekend. So that coming Monday is Indigenous Peoples Day, which most people have off. So if you can tack on a little extra night to do some sightseeing, like, this is the time to be doing it in Vermont. Now, the one caveat to that is because it's foliage season in Vermont, you will want to be grabbing hotels now, because of how busy it gets here, because that's like one of our peak tourist times.
Yeah, it's July now. Book your stuff now. Like, you can't go wrong.
Stuff. But this is going to be totally worth doing, and we've got a lovely little group started already with the 3 who have already registered. So this is like a safe container for people who are working on those really emotionally charged products.
I love that. I'm so excited for you. This is like super, super awesome. I'm a big fan of Vermont, so obviously I'm gonna
and I think we need to do one of these Unscripted together live from Vermont in the winter, since you'll be coming up here so much.
I think we should, and I think that's when we will do our photo shoot with our book babies.
Book babies! All right, folks. Thanks for joining us in person or in the replay for another episode of Unscripted. We will be back next month with another fabulous topic or guest. I don't know. All of that to be revealed soon, so stay tuned, and we'll see you next time.
Beautiful. Thanks, Ally.